The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great 78. Summary. The Muggle man was browsing the stacks at Flourish and Blotts when Lucius spotted something that would change the course of history. The Muggle had a dark mark. Surely this man, the father of a mudblood, Lucius reminded himself, hadn't been a Death Eater. Lucius didn't know how it was possible, but he vowed there and then that he and his family would do everything in their power to protect this man's daughter. Their very lives could depend upon it. Chapter 1. The Secret Serpent. Saturday, July 27th, 1991. Ah, geez, crab cake! I've driven this street twice now, and I still can't find a spot to park. Richard Granger craned his neck at an emptying spot hopefully, but it was only a taxi stand. Hermione, are you certain this is the right address? We passed number 14, but there was no sign for a pub, and the street number 14 7/8 doesn't seem to exist, love, said Linda, her fingers trailing along a map of the city as her husband drove. Mum, it was right back there. Didn't you see it? Between the little music shop and the greengrocer. There was nothing there between them, crabcake. Richard frowned. Suddenly a spot seemed to magically open up ahead, and he eagerly snapped on his blinker. Ah, here we are! Once the little family had unfolded themselves from the car, Hermione pointed ahead. There, do you see it now? The brass and cast-iron sign showed an outline of a witch stirring a cracked cauldron. A steady drip fell down to the pavement below. The sign read, The Leaky Cauldron, established 1531. The grocer and the music shop are right next to each other. There's nothing... Linda began, but then, as if by instinct, Hermione held her mother's hand in her right hand and pulled the pub's door with her left. Her mother's eyes lit up as the door seemed to push, to grow, from a hairline crack in the wall in front of them. Linda reached back in shock for the befuddled Richard, who likewise startled as the pub door came into view for him as well. Ah, geez, was all the mild-mannered man said. Mum, Dad, you'll simply never believe the books this shop has. Look at the spell books, and this one about werewolves. Linda stole an interested glance at the cover of that one. Not many magical dentists for the werewolf community, I take it. This fellow looks as though a few crowns wouldn't be enough. I wonder if he's flossing. Mum! Hermione laughed. Ah, geez, it's warm in here, isn't it? Richard approached, rolling up his shirt sleeves as he came. Crabcake, didn't we pass an ice cream shop a bit back? What say we see if they've got raspberry? They do. A languid voice drawled from behind the little family. Lucius Malfoy had noticed the family of Muggles nearly as soon as they'd entered Flourish and Blotts. They'd been hard to ignore. The mudblood child, clearly preparing to enter Hogwarts, had exclaimed excitedly over nearly everything in sight, much to the annoyance of a handful of older patrons. His own son, Draco, seemed to be highly distracted by the young witch. That would not do at all. Draco needed to keep his mind focused on his studies and on making connections with other purebloods, not concerning himself with mudblood witches. Lucius and Draco were nearly done making their selections when he'd seen it. The Muggle man, who had been browsing titles in the Transfiguration section of the shop, was walking back to his wife and daughter, removing his jumper as he went. In a moment his sleeves were rolled up, exposing it for all to see. A dark mark. But it wasn't just any dark mark. Instead of one snake coiling around a skull, this one had two snakes, intertwined, encircling a wand, and at the top, two wings. The wings of victory, perhaps. Surely this Muggle man, the father of a mudblood, Lucius reminded himself, hadn't been a Death Eater. And yet the mark was there, clearly visible. It wasn't just any mark, either. Lucius had seen many over his years, and no one had two snakes. This had to be a special dark mark. It made Lucius hesitant, afraid. Yes, he had been a servant of the Dark Lord, had followed the wizard's ways diligently for many years, and yet, when things got difficult, when it appeared that the Dark Lord had been defeated, Lucius had been one of the first to claim that he had been imperious, that he had fallen victim to the Dark Lord, rather than servant. Though rumors swirled that the Dark Lord might still be alive, might have even left a scion or a successor, still Lucius took the easy path and stayed within the confines of polite, accepting wizarding society. It had been difficult, of course. Many of his friends, his comrades, all still believed the old truths. They all still worked insidiously, privately. Rather than meeting in the halls of the ministry, they met in dark studies, in manor homes, tongues loosened only after a couple of drinks. "Father," Draco said to him, tugging on his sleeve, "what's wrong?" Lucius looked down at his son, then turned his gaze back to the Muggles. His son's eyes slid back to the family, focusing once again on the girl. "That man, I believe he serves the same master as I do." Draco turned a skeptical, appraising glance on the man. He knew, of course, all about the Dark Lord and his nearly successful bid to take over the wizarding world before Draco had been born. But as far as Draco knew, he'd only recruited pure-blood folk, not Muggles. But Lucius Malfoy was sweeping up to them, cloak gently billowing behind him. Draco hesitated. He wanted to go closer. He had never encountered Muggles or a mudblood before, having spent the entirety of his childhood surrounded by purebloods or the occasional half-blood. This was like encountering someone from another world, but it felt dodgy. He had no idea what they were like, how they would act. He'd heard that Muggles were dirty, dangerous, and yet this girl didn't seem either of those. She was picking up books, reading the covers aloud as though reading in a foreign language, exclaiming over them as though they were something different and interesting, rather than regular books. Whenever she encountered something completely normal, a memo flying through the air, or a quill writing in the ledger on its own, she stopped to marvel as though she'd found something completely unique. It was odd, and strangely captivating to watch. But his father had already reached the small family, and fearful of being left behind, Draco hurried along after him. He had no idea what conversation he thought he was walking into. Was his father challenging this man to a duel? Would this man kill Lucius on sight for having renounced the Dark Lord? Would Lucius welcome the man, invite him to attend one of the clandestine meetings he attended of fellow followers of the Dark Lord? And yet, in a surprising turn, Draco walked into the midst of a discussion about ice cream. "Yes, indeed. Raspberry, banana, mango. I believe every so often even pineapple," said Lucius meaningfully. He raised a critical eyebrow, interested to see how the Muggle man accepted the word pineapple. Traditionally, the pineapple was meant as a symbol of welcome, but as symbols often are, it had been co-opted by followers of the Dark Lord. At galas and banquets, to have a drink with a pineapple slice in it meant that you were open to the ideas of the Dark Lord. "Ah, geez, that's my favorite. You don't find it too often." "Indeed, you do not. I take it you were also a fan of dark chocolate." Another code. This, then, would be the confirmation. If this man admitted to dabbling in the dark arts, Lucius would know who he was dealing with. "Absolutely! Although I hate the stains on the enamel that it can leave behind." Lucius gasped. This had to be a follower, then. It had been a common turn of phrase used by the Dark Lord, the stains upon wizarding society that Muggles left behind in the form of mudbloods, the stain of dirty blood. There could be no doubt. This man, masquerading as a Muggle, had been one of the closest confidants of the Dark Lord. The symbol upon his arm had to represent the closeness he had shared with the Dark Lord, two snakes of the same ilk, impossibly intertwined. Lucius bowed low, and after a moment the man jerkily followed suit. This was encouraging. Perhaps he might not kill Lucius as soon as he found out about Lucius's traitorousness. And yet his curiosity got the best of him. "Your mark." At this, Lucius gestured vaguely to his own left forearm. "It is, rather unique, is it not?" The man looked down at the mark, flexing it slightly, holding it out a bit from his body. Lucius reflexively reared back, afraid of what the mark might do to him. "Oh, yeah, I got that back in the service. I was an attending with the SAS back in the day, back before I chose my specialty." "SAS?" Lucius asked, before he could help himself. Yes, you know, a special air service." Lucius nodded, not wanting to look ill-informed. He knew that the Dark Lord had been working on a method of flying without need of a broom. Voldemort had felt it important, wishing to have the ability to move without relying upon other objects. This, then, might have been what this man's role was, developing the magic needed for such an amazing feat. "Indeed, I do," Lucius replied silkily. "Weren't you part of a bunch of operations, Dad? Lots of top-secret, clandestine ops." The girl had joined them with a knowing giggle, the witch with wild curly hair and bright copper eyes. She stood close to Draco, and Lucius could immediately discern a difference in his son's demeanour. Where before Draco had been on guard but curious, now he appeared to have a slightly panicked look in his eye. "And who is this?" Lucius asked graciously. "Ah, my daughter, Hermione. Hermione, I want you to meet... sorry, I didn't get your name." "Lucius Malfoy, of the House of Malfoy," Lucius said, bowing low to the girl. "My son, Draco." At this, the girl giggled slightly, and Draco's look of panic turned to slight anger. "What's so funny?" "Oh, I apologize. It's just such an unusual name, Draco. It means dragon, yes?" "Yes," Draco said, faltering. "It's very nice. I'm Hermione. Not many people are familiar with the name Hermione. I imagine Draco is also unfamiliar to most people." Draco, who was familiar with nearly everyone in Wizarding Society, was confused, but chose not to answer. In any case, she did not appear to need an answer, rushing headlong back into the last topic of conversation. "Yes, Dad was part of a bunch of operations back in the day. What was that one in the 70s, Dad? You know, the one in Ireland." The man's look had gone from affable to closed off very quickly. "Yes, I assisted in several operations back in the day. Bloody stuff, nothing Mr. Malfoy wants to hear about, I'm sure." Lucius breathed very shallowly. Several bloody operations. This man was highly dangerous. He had to be treated carefully. And this girl, who was she in all of this? "So, Hermione, you were also beginning at Hogwarts in September?" asked Lucius. "Yes, I'm so excited. There's so much to learn, a whole new world to explore." The girl's eyes were alight and shining, a vivacity and voraciousness within them. Lucius was struck immediately by a familiarity that made him extremely uncomfortable. This girl reminded him of someone, but he was not sure who. "Ah, geez, yes, there's so much to see, and we're so excited that our little girl gets to experience this." The man turned to Draco. "Hopefully she can rely on you to show her around. Get her familiar with your world at school. Can I count on you?" Draco froze. He had no idea what to say to this, and only nodded. Lucius recognized the request for what it was. The girl was important to the cause, and must be protected. "Of course. Draco would be honored to assist the child of such a noble man." "Okay, then." The man smiled. Lucius was dismissed. "Well, We shall let you return to your purchases. Please, enjoy the rest of your afternoon." Lucius bowed once more, and the man stuck out his hand. Lucius pulled back fearfully, but after a moment realized that the man wished to grasp hands with him. Hesitantly, he placed his hand in the other man's grip and firmly shook it. "I'm Richard, by the way. Richard Granger." "Of course," Lucius said. This was unsurprising to him. Richard was a name that meant ruler, leader. Lucius had no doubt that this man was just that. He needed to spread the word. This man was dangerous. And this girl, this witch, this child of his, must be protected at all costs. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Muggle Death Eater by Great 78.